When I came back from deployment, I didn't expect my first week home to feel like a classified operation. After 15 years in Army intelligence, I'd learned to trust patterns. People slip, lies don't. Civilians call it intuition. We call it not dying. But nothing in my training prepared me for what I was about to find in Gainesville. It started simple. My mother, Margaret, hadn't answered my calls in 3 days. She was 72, healthy, lived alone after Dad passed, and hated hospitals almost as much as she hated my sister's cooking. I thought she was fine. Then I checked my messages again. Nothing from her. Just a few old texts from Rebecca about spending quality time with Mom while I was overseas. That phrase alone should have triggered an investigation. Rebecca and I were never close. She'd stayed in Florida after college, got married, and turned her personality into a full-time complaint about money. I'd joined the Army, built a life out of discipline and distance. The last time I saw her, she cried over a $9,000 credit card bill, then bought a new SUV the next day. That was Rebecca, no enemy but herself. When I called her house that morning, a man's voice answered. Curtis, her husband. I didn't say much, just asked if Mom was there. He said she was resting. His tone was off-flat, rehearsed. I'd heard the same tone from detainees in Iraq trying to make me believe everything was fine when it wasn't. I told him I'd drive up that afternoon. He hesitated a little too long before saying, "Sure, come by." The drive from Tampa to Gainesville took 3 hours. I didn't turn on the radio. My brain ran scenarios the whole way. Maybe Mom had fallen sick. Maybe she was staying with Rebecca longer than planned. Maybe no. I've seen enough maybes turn into morgues. I decided to check myself. By the time I pulled onto Rebecca's street, the sun was setting. Perfect Florida suburbia manicured lawns, kids on bikes, everyone pretending they didn't hate their HOA. Rebecca's house was at the end of the cul-de-sac. 2 cars in the driveway, curtains drawn, no movement. I parked across the street. I walked up the path, military habit kicking in, observe everything before you act. The lawn was freshly mowed, garbage cans lined up too neatly. No mail overflow, no sign of life, no noise. I pressed the doorbell. Nothing. Waited 30 seconds. Tried again. That's when I heard a voice behind me. "Wait, don't open that door." I turned. A man in his 50s was walking fast from the house next door, waving his arms like I was about to trigger an alarm. Gray hair, polo shirt tucked into khakis, nervous energy all over him. "You're Morgan, right? Margaret's daughter?" "Yes," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Who are you?" "Dan Marshall. I live next door. Listen, something happened here last week. You need to call the police." The sentence hit me like a flashbang, sharp, sudden, everything inside me alert. What happened? He glanced toward Rebecca's house. There was screaming. Late at night, your mother was yelling for help. I called 911, but your sister told the paramedics it was nothing. Said your mom had a panic attack. They left with her in an ambulance, but... He hesitated. Your sister and her husband didn't follow. Next morning, they were gone. For a second, I just stood there, processing, screaming, ambulance, gone. My brain connected the dots faster than I wanted. Which hospital? He shook his head. No idea. I figured the family would handle it, but they never came back. House has been dark ever since. I didn't say thank you. I just turned and walked fast to my car. Every instinct I had was screaming something's wrong. I dialed 911 before even starting the engine. Told them who I was, gave the address, explained that my mother might have been a recent patient under suspicious circumstances. They transferred me to the county hospital system. When the nurse on the other end said, "Yes, we have a Margaret Hale," admitted June 14th, my stomach dropped. "Condition?" I asked. "Serious but stable. Admitted for poisoning, non-accidental." The world went silent for a moment. Poisoning. Not a heart attack, not a fall. Poisoning. "I'm her daughter," I said. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. The drive to the hospital felt longer than my last deployment flight. I didn't notice traffic, lights, or turns, just the pounding rhythm of my own heartbeat. At the ICU reception, a detective was waiting for me. Mid-40s, sharp eyes, the kind of posture that said she'd seen too much. "Detective Laura Henderson," she said, flashing her badge. "You're Morgan Hale?" "Yes." "Where's my mother?" room 418. But first, I need to ask a few questions. I wanted to say no, but training wins over emotion every time. Go ahead. When was the last time you spoke to your mother? 3 days ago. She was staying here with my sister. Your sister's name? Rebecca Scott. Her husband's Curtis Scott. Henderson wrote that down. We've been trying to reach them since the hospital admission. Their phones are disconnected. Disconnected? She nodded. Your mother was brought in by paramedics. Severe reaction to a combination of sedatives and cardiac medication. She was unconscious for almost a week. What are you saying? I'm saying someone gave her enough drugs to kill her twice over. The doctors say it was deliberate. I stared at her, feeling my pulse in my neck. And you think my sister? We don't know yet. But your neighbor's statement lines up with the timeline. We'll need your help identifying some things once your mother's stable. That word once landed heavier than the rest. Once. As in if. When I finally stepped into the ICU room, the smell of antiseptic and machines hit me. Mom lay there, pale, wires everywhere, breathing steady but shallow. For the first time since basic training, I felt my knees weaken. I sat down beside her bed, took her hand. Her skin was cold, her fingers light as paper. Mom, I said softly. It's Morgan. I'm here now. Her eyes didn't open, but I felt her fingers twitch just barely, like muscle memory fighting sleep. That was enough. The nurse came in, adjusted something on the monitor, and looked at me. She's a fighter, she said quietly. Yeah, I whispered. She raised one. I stayed there all night. Henderson checked in twice, asked for Rebecca's last known contacts, places she might run to. I gave everything I knew, her real estate office, Curtis's construction company, their mortgage lender, all Florida locals. Around 4 a.m., I stood by the window looking out at the parking lot lights. Everything was quiet, too quiet. In the reflection, I could see my own face calm, focused, detached. It's the same face I wore in interrogation rooms overseas, the one that means the switch has flipped. I wasn't just visiting family anymore. This was a mission. And I wasn't leaving Gainesville until I found out exactly what my sister had done. The first sound that morning wasn't the monitors or the footsteps in the hallway. It was a faint whisper. Morgan? I froze, turned toward the bed. Mom's eyes were half open, glassy but aware. I'm here, I said, moving closer. You're okay. You're safe. Her lips were dry, her voice weak. Where's Rebecca? The question hit harder than I expected. Not how am I alive, not what happened, but where's Rebecca? I swallowed the anger building in my throat. I don't know yet, Mom. That's what I'm trying to find out. The nurse entered with a chart, caught my expression, and gave me a quiet nod before checking Mom's vitals. Stable, she said. Barely. Detective Henderson showed up 20 minutes later. Her eyes darted to the monitors before she turned to me. She's conscious? Barely, but she's lucid. Good. We'll keep it brief. The doctors cleared a short interview. End of quote. I stepped aside, but Mom grabbed my wrist. Stay. Henderson recorded the conversation. Mrs. Hale, I need you to tell me what you remember from the night you were admitted. Anything at all. Mom blinked slowly, piecing together her thoughts. Rebecca cooked dinner, pasta. I remember garlic. Then my chest started, tightening. I told her I needed a doctor. She paused, breath shallow. She said it was just stress. I begged her to call 911. Curtis told me to lie down. Lol. Her voice trembled, but she didn't stop. I tried to get up. He stood by the door. I couldn't breathe. Everything went dark after that. The nurse adjusted her oxygen line, but Mom's eyes stayed locked on Henderson's. Rebecca watched me. She didn't help. She just watched. Henderson stopped recording and closed the notepad. Thank you, Mrs. Hale. That's enough for now. When she left, I stayed by Mom's side. Her hand trembled as she reached for mine. Morgan, she whispered. Don't do anything stupid. That was her way of saying she knew I was already planning something. I stepped outside to clear my head. Hospitals have their own kind of silence, too sterile, too artificial. You can hear your heartbeat louder than your thoughts. By the elevator, Henderson was waiting. That was damning, she said quietly. But we still need corroboration, medical records, toxicology, anything connecting the drugs to your sister and brother-in-law. End quote. Do you have a warrant yet? Not yet, The DA wants a stronger foundation first. I nodded. I'll find something. She raised an eyebrow. You're not part of this investigation, Miss Hale. Then consider me a very motivated civilian. I walked away before she could argue. Back at Rebecca's neighborhood, Dan, the neighbor, was in his yard washing his truck. He waved awkwardly when he saw me. I crossed over. I went to the hospital, I said. My mother's alive. He exhaled like he'd been holding that in for a week. Thank God. I thought she was. He didn't finish. Did you see anything else that night? He wiped his hands on a towel. Just them yelling. Rebecca told the paramedics everything was fine. I thought about following the ambulance, but I didn't want to intrude. You did the right thing, I said, though my tone probably didn't convince him. I glanced toward Rebecca's house. Curtains still closed, driveway empty. You ever see anyone come or go since that night? No one, not even deliveries. But I've got a security cam by my garage, motion sensor. Might have caught something. That changed everything. 10 minutes later, I was sitting in his living room, watching footage on his laptop. June 14th, timestamp 11:58 p.m. The video showed Rebecca's driveway, dimly lit. The front door burst open. Rebecca appeared, yelling toward the street, followed by Curtis. Both looked panicked too much for a panic attack. Then, the ambulance arrived. 2 paramedics went inside. A few minutes later, they came out, pushing a stretcher. My mother, motionless. Rebecca stood there, arms crossed. Curtis waved them off. When the ambulance drove away, they both turned and went back inside, not one step toward the vehicle. Dan paused the video, shaking his head. They didn't even pretend to care. Can you send me that footage? He hesitated. Shouldn't I give it to the police? You will, I said. But let me make sure it doesn't disappear into paperwork first. He nodded slowly. I trust you. I copied the file to my drive and thanked him. When I stepped back outside, the Florida heat hit me like a punch. My phone buzzed unknown number. Miss Hale? The voice was female, professional. This is Dr. Patel from Gainesville Medical. I treated your mother. Yes, doctor. Nah. I thought you should know your mother's toxicology report confirms zolpidem and digoxin in her system. Neither prescribed to her. Lethal combination if untreated. I leaned against the car. Digoxin's a cardiac drug. My mom doesn't have a heart condition. Exactly, Patel said. Which means whoever gave it to her knew what they were doing. When I hung up, I stared at the sky for a long second. It was bright and ordinary, like none of this was real. I sent Henderson the video footage immediately. 10 minutes later, she called back. That's gold, she said. Enough for a search warrant. We'll hit their house today. I'm coming. No, you're not. She hung up before I could argue. By late afternoon, I couldn't sit still. I parked 3 streets away and walked up on foot. Old habits die hard. When the forensics van pulled up to Rebecca's driveway, I watched from behind a parked SUV. Henderson arrived in an unmarked car, showed the warrant to the officer at the door. They went in. For 2 hours, I stayed there. Finally, she came out holding a small plastic evidence bag, pill bottles. She saw me before getting into her car. For a second, we just looked at each other. Then she gave a short nod. Confirmation. I followed her back to the station. She didn't stop me when I walked in behind her. Inside the evidence room, she laid the bottles on the table. One labeled zolpidem tartrate, prescribed to Curtis Scott. Another unmarked, handwritten labeled digoxin, half full. Found in the upstairs bathroom cabinet, she said. Curtis's prints all over both. Rebecca? Her prints are on the cabinet handle, not the bottles. Still enough to show she knew. I crossed my arms. So what now? Now we build the case. But I'll be honest, this is looking bad for both of them. Good. I looked down at the evidence again. The white label reflecting the fluorescent light. Curtis's name. Rebecca's fingerprints, Mom's blood tests. The pieces were falling into place. Once we confirmed the prescription records, Henderson said, we can issue arrest warrants. Could be as early as tomorrow. Tomorrow. The word should have felt satisfying. Instead, it felt like a fuse about to reach the end. I didn't leave the station until after dark. On the way back to the hospital, I stopped at a gas station, grabbed black coffee, and stared at the receipt. Curtis's name, Rebecca's lies, my mother's blood, everything on paper, simple and cruel. When I got back to the ICU, Mom was asleep again. Her color looked better, but her breathing was shallow. I sat down, the chair creaking in the quiet. I didn't say anything. Didn't need to. Somewhere in that stillness, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was calculating. Rebecca had made a plan. Now I had one too. The next morning, I was already awake before the hospital lights came on. The air smelled like disinfectant and burnt coffee, same as every other morning in ICU. Mom was asleep, her vitals stable, the nurses whispering like they were afraid of waking ghosts. I left before sunrise. At the police station, Henderson was hunched over her desk when I walked in. She didn't look surprised to see me, just tired. "You're early," she said. "I don't sleep much." End of quote. She slid a file across the desk. Pharmacy records. Curtis filled a prescription for digoxin last month, claimed it was for his uncle with heart problems. No such uncle exists. We checked. I skimmed the paperwork. And Rebecca? Nothing directly tied to her yet, but her bank activity is interesting. Transfers between her account and Curtis's gambling apps. Nearly $50,000 in the last 6 months. That number didn't shock me. Rebecca had a talent for financial suicide. They were desperate, I said. Looks that way. Henderson leaned back in her chair. But desperation doesn't equal intent. The DA wants hard motive before we file charges. Motive? I raised an eyebrow. Try inheritance. My parents' house alone is worth 7 figures. Rebecca's been whining about debt since I joined the army. You're saying she wanted her share early. I'm saying she tried to cash out my mother. Henderson studied me for a moment. You sound like you've seen this before. Different field, I said. Same tactics. Pressure, opportunity, justification. You'd be amazed how much family drama looks like espionage when money's involved. She cracked the faintest smile. You'd make a decent detective. Already am, I said, and left before she could remind me I wasn't. By mid-morning, I was at Rebecca's old office. Scott Realty was printed in peeling gold letters across the window. Inside, the air smelled like coffee and paper. A young receptionist looked up, nervous when she saw my uniform jacket. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for Rebecca Scott," I said. "She doesn't work here anymore." "Since when?" "About a week." She emailed the resignation, no notice. I nodded. "Did she leave anything behind?" The receptionist hesitated, then shrugged. "Just a drawer full of junk. We didn't throw it out yet." 5 minutes later, I was flipping through a half-empty file cabinet. Receipts, client forms, takeout menus, then something useful, a torn envelope from a payday loan service, past due. And another. A letter from a law firm in Tampa. Estate law. My mother's name in the header. I didn't read it there. I thanked the receptionist, left, and opened it in the car. It was from a firm called Harrison and Webb Associates, addressed to Rebecca. It referenced inquiry regarding probate timelines and next-of-kin inheritance laws. The date 2 weeks before Mom was poisoned. I stared at it, the kind of silence where you can almost hear your own pulse. She'd planned this, methodically. At that moment, my phone buzzed. Unknown number again. Morgan Hale? The voice was male, steady, professional. "This is James Walker. I'm an attorney. Your mother's estate planner. I believe your sister reached out to us last month?" I almost laughed. "She did more than that. I'm sitting in a parking lot looking at your letter right now." He hesitated. "Then you already know what she asked. She wanted to know how soon assets transfer if a parent dies. She said your mother was unwell." "Unwell?" I repeated. "She was fine until Rebecca fed her a chemical cocktail." Walker exhaled. "I've worked in law 20 years. I've seen family greed. But this is something else. If you need representation, I can help." I paused. "Not yet, but keep your phone on." I hung up, put the letter back in the envelope, and just sat there for a while. Gainesville's morning rush moved around me, commuters, school buses, dogs on leashes, everyone living in their own normal. Meanwhile, mine had collapsed into evidence, timelines, and motive. When I got back to the hospital, Mom was awake again. Her color was better, but she still looked fragile, the way people do when they've seen too much. She smiled faintly. "You look like you're on a mission." "Always am," I said, pulling up a chair. "Do you remember anything else from that night?" Her brow furrowed. Rebecca was calm. Too calm. When I said I needed a doctor, she told me not to make a scene. Then she turned up the TV. I remember that. She turned up the TV so the neighbors wouldn't hear me. I felt my stomach twist. She knew exactly what she was doing. Mom nodded weakly. Don't let anger make you like her. I didn't answer. That afternoon, Henderson called again. We traced Curtis's pharmacy purchase to a local Walgreens. The prescription was written by a Dr. Michael Grant. Legit? Yes. But here's the thing, Grant's out of town on medical leave. He confirmed over email that his pad was stolen last month. Guess who had an appointment with him before that? Curtis Scott. Classic forgery, I said. You've got the drugs, the handwriting, the motive. We're getting there, Henderson said. The DA's reviewing the warrant request for their arrest. Keep me posted. I hung up, opened my laptop, and started building my own file. Military habit organized chaos. I created folders labeled timeline, evidence, financials, witness statements. I printed the hospital report, attached screenshots from Dan's video, added copies of Rebecca's emails to the law firm. By the time the sun went down, the desk looked like a briefing room before a mission. At 8 p.m., Henderson texted one line, "We got the warrants." I didn't think. I just grabbed my keys and left. The drive to Rebecca's house was quiet. Police cruisers were already there when I arrived, lights flashing softly against the cul-de-sac. Henderson was standing by her car, watching officers carry out evidence boxes. "They're not here," she said when I approached. "Neighbors said they came back earlier today, stayed for 20 minutes, then left again. No idea where." Of course they did. Don't worry, she added. "Their phones may be off, but we'll find them. They can't hide forever." I watched the officers seal up the front door. What happens when you do? Arrest, booking, then bail hearing. Standard procedure. Standard doesn't fit this, I said. They tried to kill my mother. "I know," Henderson said softly. "And we'll prove it." I didn't reply. The law would take its time. I wouldn't. The next morning, I called Marcus Webb. He was an old Army buddy turned private investigator, someone who knew how to dig without leaving prints. "Long time, Hale," he said when he picked up. "You sound like someone about to ruin someone's life." "Not ruin," I said. "Expose." He laughed. "Semantics. Send me what you've got." By noon, I'd emailed him everything. Financials, hospital records, pharmacy info. He promised results in 2 days. Mom was transferred out of ICU that afternoon. She could walk short distances now, though she still looked like she'd been through hell. When the nurse left, she turned to me. "Have they caught them?" "Not yet," I said. "But we're closing in." She squeezed my hand. "Morgan, when you find them, don't lose yourself over it." I forced a smile. "Don't worry, I've got rules." That night, I lay awake in the chair next to her bed, staring at the ceiling tiles. I thought about every mission I'd ever done, every enemy I'd ever outsmarted. And then I realized this was the first time the enemy had my last name. Somewhere between midnight and dawn, my phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. "Found something. You're going to want to see this." I stared at the screen, the light reflecting off the hospital wall, and knew this wasn't just family drama anymore. It was about to turn into a war. The moment I saw Marcus's message, sleep stopped being an option. I slipped out of the hospital before sunrise, grabbed a coffee that tasted like mud, and drove to the diner he'd chosen somewhere halfway between Gainesville and Ocala, the kind of place that looked like it hadn't changed since Nixon resigned. Marcus was already there, sitting in a corner booth, laptop open, 2 folders beside it. He looked exactly the same as when I last saw him: faded jeans, leather jacket, the face of a man who'd seen too much and learned to joke about it. He didn't waste time. "Your sister and her husband are circling the drain financially. Their mortgage is in default, credit cards maxed, 2 payday loans, and Curtis owes around $100,000 to a gambling site based out of Miami." I stirred my coffee, watching the bubbles swirl. "So they needed money, fast." He nodded. "And they knew your mom had it. But that's not the good part." He slid a second folder across the table. 2 weeks before your mother ended up in the hospital, Rebecca made a call to her mom's estate attorney. Asked how soon assets transfer if someone dies unexpectedly. "Yeah, I've seen the letter." "This is the follow-up email," Marcus said, tapping his laptop. She wanted to know whether her sister, meaning you could legally contest the will from overseas if she was still on active duty. She literally asked if your service would delay the process. I stared at the screen. She was checking if I'd be too busy fighting a war to stop her from committing murder. Exactly. Marcus leaned back. She's sloppy. They both are. Curtis used his personal laptop to search digoxin overdose symptoms and how long before cardiac meds kill. I got that through a subpoena request Henderson slipped to the DA this morning. Once it's approved, that laptop is evidence. He said it like he was reporting weather. That's the thing about people like us, emotion gets compartmentalized until you need it for leverage. I took a breath. We're past family problems, Marcus. This is conspiracy to commit murder. He nodded. You going official? I shook my head. Not yet. Official gets slow. I want everything lined up before anyone cuts a deal. Careful, he said. You're walking a fine line between justice and revenge. Then I'll balance better. End quote. By the time I drove back to Gainesville, the sun was high, burning through the windshield. My phone buzzed a text from Henderson. Both suspects located. Orlando. Returning to Florida tonight for questioning. Finally. At the hospital, Mom was sitting upright, flipping through a magazine like she was just waiting for a flight. She looked better, but her voice still rasped when she spoke. You found something. I sat beside her. Rebecca and Curtis are back in the state. The police will question them tonight. She closed the magazine slowly. What do you think they'll say? They'll lie, I said. They'll say it was an accident, that you took the pills yourself. Mom's expression didn't change, but her hands tightened on the pages. Do you ever wonder how people like that sleep? They don't, I said. They just pretend better than most. That evening, I met Henderson outside the precinct. The interrogation rooms were down a narrow hallway lined with one-way mirrors. Through the glass, I saw Rebecca sitting across from a detective, her hair neat, her face pale, playing the role of the concerned daughter. Curtis sat in the next room, tapping his fingers on the table, eyes darting toward the door every few seconds. He looked like a man trying to remember which version of his lie matched hers. Henderson folded her arms. They're both saying your mother took the medication herself, that she was stressed about money. My mother doesn't take sleeping pills. She plays Sudoku and lectures her plants. That's her therapy. I believe you, Henderson said, but a jury needs more than belief. Through the glass, I watched Rebecca's lips move slow, deliberate, like she was narrating a tragedy she'd rehearsed. Can I talk to her? I asked. Henderson gave me a look that said I'd lost my mind. Absolutely not. Then I'll just listen. Isaacs. Rebecca raised her voice just enough for the mic to catch. My mom was always anxious. I told her to rest, but she kept saying her heart was racing. I didn't know what to do. It was eerie hearing her sound so gentle. She'd used that same tone when she was 8 and stole Mom's credit card to buy clothes online. Curtis, in the other room, was sweating through his shirt. The detective leaned forward, asking something I couldn't hear. Curtis's lips twitched. He answered too fast. Classic tell. He's going to break first, I said. Probably, Henderson replied. He's the weak link. I didn't say anything else. I just watched my sister lie with confidence and my brother-in-law crumble in real time. At midnight, I got the text from Henderson. They've been released pending further evidence. Don't worry, we've got enough to keep them close. Don't worry. Sure. The next morning, I stopped by Marcus's office. He'd printed everything. Rebecca's emails, Curtis's gambling debts, bank records, the forged prescription. He looked proud, like a kid showing off a science project that could destroy 2 lives. Here's your smoking gun, he said. Curtis forged the doctor's signature and used Rebecca's laptop to print the label. I traced the printer IP to their house. I flipped through the pages. Perfect. Send a copy to Henderson and keep one for yourself. Marcus gave me a long look. You know, most people would be relieved the cops have this. You look like you're about to plan something. I'm planning to make sure they can't twist this story again. He smirked. You always did hate unfinished business. When I left his office, the weather had turned. Florida storms come out of nowhere, heavy and sudden. I sat in the car for a minute, listening to the rain hit the windshield. Somewhere between the thunder and the wipers, my phone rang unknown number again. Morgan Hale? Yes. This is Patricia Vance. I'm representing Rebecca Scott. She asked me to reach out. Of course she did. What does she want? She believes there's been a misunderstanding, Vance said smoothly. She'd like to resolve things privately before this becomes a criminal matter. I laughed out loud. She tried to kill our mother. That's not something you handle privately. I understand you're angry. No, I cut in. Angry was 3 days ago. I'm focused now. I hung up before she could reply. Back at the hospital, Mom was watching the evening news. The headline crawler at the bottom of the screen read, "Local couple questioned in attempted poisoning." She looked at me when I walked in. It's public now. Good, I said. Let everyone see what they are. She sighed, her eyes tired but steady. And what are you, Morgan? Someone cleaning up a mess I didn't make. She didn't argue. She just reached over and took my hand. Her grip was weak, but her eyes said everything. By the time the nurses came in to check her vitals, my mind was already somewhere else scanning the next move, assessing the next weak point. I'd spent years tracking insurgents who thought they were smarter than the system. My sister wasn't any different. She'd picked the wrong opponent. And this time, I didn't need a battlefield. I already had one. The first thing I noticed when I walked into Mom's room the next morning wasn't the sound of the monitors, it was her voice. Clear, calm, like it had been waiting all night. Morgan, sit down. I remember everything. That sentence stopped me cold. She looked stronger, more present. There was color in her cheeks again, focus in her eyes. It's all coming back to me, she said quietly. Rebecca didn't panic. She planned it. I could see it in her face. I took the chair next to her bed. Start from the beginning. Mom stared at the blanket for a few seconds like she was replaying a film. It was after dinner. Curtis poured wine, but I didn't drink much. Rebecca kept watching me like she was waiting for something to happen. When I started feeling dizzy, I told her to call 911. She said it was probably dehydration. Her voice cracked a little, but she kept going. Then my chest hurt. I couldn't breathe. I begged her to help me. Curtis stood in front of the door, blocking it. He said, "You're fine, Margaret. Sit down." I remember the look on Rebecca's face, cold, like she'd already decided how the story would end. She took a shaky breath. I tried to crawl toward the phone, but she pulled it out of reach. She told me, "You're making it worse, Mom. Just lie down." Then everything went black. I clenched my jaw so hard my temples hurt. "You're sure of this?" Every word, she said. I remember hearing someone outside. A man's voice. The neighbor, I think. He shouted something. That must have been when they called the ambulance. It matched Dan's story exactly. Every detail lined up. Mom's hand trembled when she reached for the cup of water beside her. "I don't understand it," she said softly. "She's my daughter. I raised her better than this." I didn't answer. There wasn't an answer that made sense. A knock on the door broke the silence. Detective Henderson stepped in, holding a folder. "Morning, Mrs. Hale." "Morgan." Mom nodded politely. Henderson flipped open her file. The DA reviewed the evidence overnight. We're issuing formal charges: attempted murder, conspiracy, and obstruction. Mom exhaled, like the words had weight. "So it's official?" "Yes, ma'am." Henderson glanced at me. "Curtis is already in custody. Rebecca turned herself in this morning with her attorney." That part I didn't expect. Turned herself in? She's claiming it was all Curtis's idea. Says she didn't know what he'd done until it was too late. And of shin. Mom laughed. A short, bitter sound that didn't sound like her. "Of course she is." Henderson sighed. "We'll need both of you to provide formal statements for the prosecution file. Mrs. Hale, your account will be key. If you're up for it, I can record it today." Mom nodded without hesitation. "Let's do it." While Henderson set up the recorder, I stepped into the hallway. Hospitals always smell like guilt and lemon cleaner. I found a vending machine, grabbed a bottle of water, and tried to breathe. When I got back, Mom was mid-sentence, voice steady despite everything. She watched me collapse. She didn't even flinch. That's not shock. That's intent. Henderson gave a small nod. "Thank you, Mrs. Hale. That's all for now." She turned off the recorder. As soon as she left, Mom leaned back against the pillow. "You know what hurts the most?" I wasn't surprised. That hit me harder than anything else. Later that afternoon, while Mom rested, I sat in the hospital cafeteria, laptop open, scanning through Marcus's latest report. He dug deeper. Rebecca and Curtis had sold 2 cars, liquidated their joint account, and withdrawn almost $20,000 in cash right before the poisoning. They were preparing to run. He'd also attached a note. Check their storage unit. Rented 3 weeks before the incident. Key pickup signed by Curtis. I forwarded it to Henderson. 10 minutes later, she called back. We're already on it. Good find. At the same time, local news started picking up the story. The headlines were predictable. Florida couple accused of poisoning family member for inheritance. The photo they used was from Rebecca's real estate website, her smiling in front of a house, holding a clipboard, looking like she'd sell you the American dream. The comments section was a mess of outrage, sympathy, and disbelief. I didn't read more than 5. People love tragedy when it isn't theirs. When I returned to Mom's room, she was watching the same story on TV. The nurse tried to change the channel, but Mom stopped her. No, let it play. I want to see what lies they tell. The reporter was outside the courthouse, microphone in hand. Behind her, Rebecca was walking with her attorney, sunglasses on, pretending the cameras didn't exist. She looked smaller somehow, like the weight of the lie was catching up. Mom shook her head. She always cared about appearances. Now look at her. End quote. I muted the TV. The DA's building the case. It won't take long. Mom gave a faint smile. You sound like you're briefing a mission. It kind of is, I said, just without the uniform. That night, while Mom slept, I sat by the window with my laptop. I kept reading through every page Marcus had sent: financial trails, text logs, phone calls between Rebecca and Curtis that ended the day before Mom collapsed. It was all there, but the part that stood out was a text from Rebecca to Curtis that simply said, "Make sure it looks natural." That line repeated in my head for hours. The next day, Henderson came by again. We recovered the storage unit contents, she said. Mostly junk, but there's something you should know. We found a forged prescription pad and a box of labeled bottles. Same handwriting as the fake label from their house. And Fred Curtis's? Likely, but Rebecca's fingerprints are on the inside of the box. She packed it. That was all the confirmation I needed. By late afternoon, Mom was cleared for discharge. She didn't say much during the paperwork. When the nurse wheeled her out, she looked around the lobby, like she didn't recognize the world outside anymore. I want to go home, she said. Her home in Tampa had always been her fortress. Neat, quiet, predictable. We settled her in, and she fell asleep almost instantly on the couch, still in her hospital robe. I watched her for a while before turning off the light. In the kitchen, I found her old will in the desk drawer. It still named Rebecca as sole beneficiary. I placed it on the counter like evidence and stared at it. She'd trusted Rebecca with everything. By morning, I'd already called James Walker, the estate attorney. We need to make changes, I said. Today. He didn't ask why. He just said, I'll have a revised draft ready by noon. Mom signed the new will that afternoon, her signature shaky but firm. Everything went to charity, not a cent to Rebecca. She looked up at me after signing. This isn't revenge, Morgan. It's protection. I know, I said, but sometimes they look the same. I shredded the old will myself. That evening, the doorbell rang. A courier stood outside with a sealed envelope. I signed for it, closed the door, and opened it on the table. Inside was a letter from Rebecca, handwritten. Mom, I didn't mean for it to happen this way. Curtis pushed me. I panicked. Please forgive me. I love you. No apology, no ownership, just manipulation disguised as guilt. I folded it neatly and dropped it into the trash. Mom watched me from the hallway. What did she say? Nothing that matters. She nodded once. Good. The TV was still on in the background. The reporter's voice carried from the living room. Police sources confirm the suspect's assets have been frozen pending the civil suit filed by the victim's family. Mom looked toward the screen, then at me. You filed a civil suit? I poured her tea. Not yet, but I will. Her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. That's my girl. By the end of that week, the story had gone from a police report to a circus. Gainesville's local news couldn't stop running it. Sister and brother-in-law accused in attempted poisoning for inheritance. The story was sensational enough to trend online. Reporters camped outside my mother's house, like vultures waiting for a confession. The first time I saw Rebecca's face on TV, she was crying. Not the guilty kind, no, it was the performative kind. The interview was staged in her lawyer's office, a soft-lit setup meant to make her look like a misunderstood suburban mom. She wore a beige sweater, minimal makeup, and that innocent tone she used when she'd been caught stealing as a teenager. "I love my mother," she told the reporter, her voice cracking on cue. "This has all been a horrible misunderstanding." She was stressed. We tried to help her. I almost dropped my coffee. "She's not even pretending to deny it," I said out loud. Mom, sitting on the couch, didn't look surprised. "Your sister could charm a fire out of water. She's been rehearsing that face since she was 10. That night I got a call from Walker, the civil attorney now handling our case. "You need to be ready for a media hit job," he said. Their lawyer, Patricia Vance, filed a countersuit for defamation. "It's nonsense, but it'll make headlines." "She's suing us for defamation," I repeated flatly, "after trying to kill our mother." "It's a tactic," Walker explained. "They're trying to muddy the water, make it look like a family feud instead of attempted murder. If the jury pool starts doubting your motives, it helps them." "I'll handle it," I said. "Morgan," he warned, "don't. Let me fight this in court, not in the press." But the thing about the press is they don't wait for the truth. They build the story around whoever speaks first. So I spoke. When the local station called for a response, I didn't send a statement through a lawyer. I went on camera myself, in uniform. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I looked straight at the reporter and said, "My sister and her husband attempted to murder my mother. That's not an allegation, it's a fact supported by physical evidence, medical records, and witness statements. They're not victims, they're manipulators." The clip ran on the evening news, and by morning the internet had divided into teams. Number Justice for Margaret versus number Believe Rebecca. Mom wasn't thrilled about it. "I don't like being a headline," she said over breakfast. "You didn't choose to be one," I replied. "But if we stay quiet, they control the story." That afternoon, my phone didn't stop buzzing. Friends, colleagues, strangers, all sending messages, opinions, judgments. Some were supportive. Others asked if maybe there had been a misunderstanding. I deleted half of them. When Henderson called, her tone was weary. "Nice interview. You just made my job harder." I told the truth. I said, "You also gave their lawyer a reason to claim bias in the investigation." "Bias?" I scoffed. "Bias doesn't put poison in someone's bloodstream." She sighed. "Just keep your head down. The DA's preparing the trial. We don't need more noise." The next morning, I found out the noise had grown. The Tampa Tribune ran a front-page story. "Daughter versus daughter. A family divided by greed and grief." They used an old photo of Rebecca and me from high school smiling, arms around each other at graduation. The caption read, "Once inseparable sisters, now on opposite sides of justice." Mom saw it before I did. When I came downstairs, she was sitting at the table with the newspaper folded neatly beside her tea. "They make it sound like a sibling spat," she said, her voice dry. "Not like attempted murder." "That's the point," I replied. "They're trying to humanize her. Make it complicated. And nothing about this is complicated," she said. "But in the public eye, everything was complicated. That's what sells." Walker filed the civil complaint that same day, 40 pages of financial records, hospital invoices, and text evidence. The headline number was $2 million in damages. "We'll never see a cent," he told me. "But that's not the goal. It's about accountability." He was right. That night, the cameras caught Rebecca again, this time outside the courthouse. She held a tissue she didn't need and told the press, "My sister has turned this into a witch hunt. She's using her military background to intimidate us." That line hit a nerve. I'd spent 2 decades serving a country that paid me less than most realtors make in a year, and now she was using it as a weapon against me. The hypocrisy would have been funny if it didn't make me want to throw the TV out the window. Mom didn't even blink. "She's desperate. Desperation makes people talk stupid." She wasn't wrong. The next day, Walker's office became the command center for what he called legal containment. His assistant printed out every media statement, every post, every quote. They stacked into piles that made my military briefings look light. Walker handed me one sheet. "This is what we're releasing officially. No more interviews, no more reactions. From now on, everything goes through me. Understood, I said, but he could tell I didn't mean it. Later that evening, Marcus dropped by with new intel. You're not going to like this, he said, setting his laptop on my kitchen counter. Rebecca and Curtis hired a PR firm. They're painting themselves as victims of a vindictive military sister and an unstable elderly parent. He clicked play on a clip. Rebecca's voice filled the room. Mom has memory issues. She's confused. Curtis and I tried to help her, but Morgan doesn't want to listen. She's always needed control. Marcus paused the video. They're going for sympathy. I nodded slowly. Then let's make sure no one feels it. We worked late that night. Marcus gathered public documents, Rebecca's unpaid loans, Curtis's gambling records, their foreclosure notice. Every detail matched the same pattern: debt, desperation, motive. By morning, I had a packet ready facts, not accusations. I sent it to 3 reporters I trusted. No commentary, no drama, just the truth. The headlines shifted overnight. Financial troubles may be motive in Gainesville poisoning case. That was enough to flip the narrative. When Henderson called again, she sounded almost impressed. You just did the DA's job for them. I'm not waiting for the system to catch up, I said. My sister had her chance to speak. Now it's my turn. At the same time, Walker moved the civil case forward. The court approved an emergency motion freezing all of Rebecca and Curtis's assets: house, cars, joint accounts, even her business license. He called me that afternoon. They can't access a dime. You've effectively cut off their escape. I didn't celebrate. I just said, good. When I told Mom, she smiled faintly. You're fighting a war without guns this time. Ich struggle. Same strategy. Different terrain. That evening, while the sun went down, we watched the local news together again. Rebecca's lawyer was on camera, her tone brittle. This family has been torn apart by misunderstandings. We hope for healing, not hatred. Mom muted the TV. She really said that with a straight face? Yeah, I said. And she's getting paid by the hour to say it. We sat in silence for a while. The living room was quiet except for the sound of the ceiling fan and the soft beeping of Mom's heart monitor. She looked at me and said, Morgan, whatever happens, don't lose your peace. Now, I thought about that for a moment. Peace is for people who haven't been poisoned by their own family. She gave a small smile. Then maybe find something close to it. I didn't answer. The phone buzzed on the table. Marcus again. His message was short, almost casual. Curtis just cracked an interrogation. I looked at Mom. The storm's breaking, I said quietly. And somewhere deep inside, I knew this wasn't victory yet. It was just the sound of a door unlocking. When Marcus texted that Curtis had cracked, I didn't even pretend to be surprised. Men like him always broke first. He wasn't built for pressure, just greed and excuses. The next morning, Henderson called. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the adrenaline under it. Curtis confessed, she said. He's cutting a deal. I sat down at the kitchen table. How much did he give up? Everything. He said Rebecca planned the poisoning. He just followed her instructions. Claims she promised they'd start fresh, once your mom was gone. Start fresh, I repeated. That's one way to describe attempted murder. Henderson exhaled. He's turning state's evidence, testifying against her in exchange for a reduced sentence. The DA's office is preparing the plea paperwork today. I rubbed my temples. He'll say whatever makes him look less guilty. He didn't just talk, Morgan, Henderson said. He gave us proof. He showed us texts, emails, the forged prescription label she sent him from her laptop, and voice messages where she reminded him to check the dosage. That stopped me cold. She sent him a dosage reminder? Word for word. Make sure it looks like stress. Related heart failure. No mistakes this time. No mistakes this time. Those 3 words rewrote everything I thought I knew about Rebecca. When can I see the file? I asked. Not yet, she said. But once the DA files charges, it becomes part of discovery. You'll get a copy through your attorney. After we hung up, I sat there staring at the wall. The house felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. Mom was still asleep in the next room. I didn't want to wake her. Not yet. By noon, the story was everywhere again. New twist in Gainesville poisoning case. Husband turns on wife. The media didn't even wait for the paperwork. They never do. I drove to the precinct. Henderson was in her office, coffee in one hand, stress in the other. "You shouldn't be here," she said, but she didn't make me leave. "I just want to hear her version," I said. "Off the record." She gave me a long look, then finally nodded toward the observation room. "You didn't get this from me." Rebecca was sitting at the metal table, wrists cuffed, eyes red but dry. She looked older, like guilt aged her overnight. Across from her, the DA's assistant was reading from a document, listing out the charges: attempted first-degree murder, conspiracy, fraud. Rebecca didn't argue. She just listened, lips pressed together like she was saving her breath for something important. When the list ended, the assistant said, "You can speak now, Mrs. Scott." Rebecca looked up. "I didn't mean to kill her." The assistant didn't react. "You gave your husband the dosage." "I thought it would just make her sleep. I didn't think that she might die," the assistant interrupted. Rebecca's eyes darted toward the mirror, right where I was standing. For a second, I swore she knew I was there. Her jaw tightened. "Morgan always got everything," she said suddenly. "She got the career, the attention, the respect. I just wanted Mom to see me for once." I almost laughed, but the sound stuck in my throat. That was it. Her motive wasn't just money, it was ego. Jealousy sharpened into something deadly. When they took her out of the room, Henderson joined me at the window. "She's not denying it anymore," she said, "just trying to make it sound like an accident." "Does she realize she's digging her own grave?" "She doesn't think she's a villain," Henderson said. "People like that never do." Mom didn't take the news the way I expected. When I told her that Curtis had confessed and Rebecca had been arrested again, she didn't cry. She just sat there, hands folded in her lap, eyes distant. "You know," she said quietly, "when she was little, she used to make excuses for everything. Even when she broke something, it was always someone else's fault. She never grew out of it." "No," Mom said, her voice low. "She just found bigger things to break." The next day, I met with Walker to go over trial prep. The state wanted me on the witness list not just as a family member, but as the one who uncovered most of the evidence. Walker went through his notes. "Your testimony's strong. Just stick to the facts. No opinions, no emotion." "That's easy," I said. "Emotion's been gone for weeks." He gave a thin smile. "I doubt that." When I got home, I found an envelope shoved under the front door. No return address. I opened it carefully, Rebecca's handwriting again. "Morgan, I know you think I'm a monster, but I never wanted to hurt Mom. Curtis pushed me and I panicked. Please tell her I'm sorry. I can't live with this." No signature, no explanation. Just that. I folded the letter once, then again, then dropped it in the shredder. That night, Henderson called. Curtis signed his plea deal. He'll serve 15 years with eligibility for parole in 10. In exchange, he'll testify that Rebecca masterminded the entire plan. I stared out the window. 15 years for trying to kill someone? He's the state's witness. They always get less. And Rebecca? She's facing life. No parole if convicted. 1. The next morning, Mom decided she wanted to attend the preliminary hearing. I tried to talk her out of it. She was still weak, but she gave me that look that always ended arguments. The courtroom was small, quiet, except for the shuffle of papers. When they brought Rebecca in, the room shifted. She wouldn't look at us. Her lawyer whispered something, and she nodded once, staring at the floor. When the judge read the charges aloud, Rebecca's face didn't change. But when they asked if she understood the accusations, she finally looked up right at Mom. "I understand," she said, her voice breaking just once. Mom didn't flinch. Afterward, outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed like flies. I got Mom to the car before they could start throwing questions. "How does it feel to testify against your own sister?" one of them shouted. Mom muttered under her breath, "Like surviving twice." End quote. That night, I went through the evidence again, even though I didn't need to. Every file, every photo, every timeline. The story was airtight. Rebecca and Curtis had planned the poisoning, staged the ambulance call, and tried to frame Mom's illness as natural. The motive was money and resentment. Simple, predictable. But as I stared at the photos, I realized it wasn't about greed anymore. It was about control. Rebecca hated being second. She wanted to prove she could manipulate the world the way I'd learned to in the military through planning, precision, and power. Except she forgot one thing. Control only works if you can face the consequences. Later that week, Marcus dropped by again. "You're officially famous," he said, setting a newspaper on the counter. "Army intelligence officer helps solve mother's poisoning case." I scanned the article. "They make it sound like a Netflix special." He smirked. "It'll probably become one." "Great," I said dryly. "Maybe I'll finally get a day off." Marcus looked at me for a long moment. "You know this doesn't end with the trial, right?" "I know," I said, "but it's where it starts to make sense." Mom came into the kitchen just then, moving slowly but steady. She poured herself coffee, looked at me, and said, "Did I ever tell you why I named her Rebecca?" I shook my head. "Because it means to bind. I thought it meant she'd keep us close." She looked down at her mug. "Turns out it meant she'd keep us tied to her mess." I didn't have an answer for that. The clock ticked, the coffee steamed, and for once, the house felt still. But somewhere in the quiet, I could feel the next battle forming, the one that happens after the truth is out, when everyone's left to live with what's left of it. The courthouse in Gainesville looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe it was the nerves, or maybe it was the fact that this time, the enemy wasn't behind a locked door in another country. It was sitting 20 feet away, wearing a beige suit and pretending she hadn't tried to kill our mother. Mom sat beside me at the plaintiff's table, her posture straight, her face calm. She looked like a woman who'd seen the worst and decided she wouldn't flinch anymore. Henderson was 2 rows behind us, flipping through her notes, while Walker leaned over and whispered, "Stay composed. Let the evidence do the talking." That was easy advice for someone who didn't grow up with Rebecca. The trial opened with the prosecutor laying out the facts: prescription forgery, financial motive, toxicology reports. He didn't use big words or dramatics, just the kind of steady, brutal clarity that left no room for doubt. Every sentence landed like a nail sealing a coffin. Then he played the recording of Curtis's confession. The courtroom fell silent as Curtis's voice filled the speakers. "Rebecca told me what to do. She said Mom was worth more dead than alive. She planned everything: dosage, timing, even told me to say it was stress. I just did what she asked." Rebecca kept her head down the whole time, her attorney scribbling notes like she could rewrite reality. I watched her shoulders stiffen as the playback continued, her own voice, calm and deliberate, saying, "No mistakes this time." No one breathed until the recording stopped. When it was my turn to testify, the bailiff had to remind me to raise my right hand. I'd done that gesture more times than I could count in the Army, but this time it meant something heavier. Walker led the questioning. "State your name for the record." "Morgan Hale." "Occupation?" "Army Intelligence Officer." "I do." He nodded. "Can you tell the court what led you to discover your mother's condition wasn't accidental?" I told it all. The way I'd learned to report in debriefings: facts, sequence, cause, effect. I described arriving at Rebecca's house, Dan's warning, the hospital report, the forged prescription, the financial records. No emotion, no embellishment, just the truth. When I finished, Walker asked, "And what did you conclude from your findings?" "That my sister and her husband planned my mother's death for money." Rebecca's attorney stood up for cross-examination. A woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and the kind of voice designed to sound rational. "Ms. Hale, you've had a long career in the military, correct?" "Yes." "You've spent years analyzing people, gathering intelligence, studying behavior?" "That's correct." "End of frick. So it's fair to say you might have a tendency to overanalyze? To assume motive where there may be none?" I gave her a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "No. It's fair to say I know the difference between an accident and attempted murder." The courtroom chuckled softly. The judge tapped his pen, unimpressed but not angry. She shifted tactics. "Would it be fair to say you and your sister had a strained relationship prior to this incident?" "Define strained." "She said you were distant, competitive, that you often criticized her choices." "That's true," I said. "I criticize bad choices. It's kind of my job." The defense attorney frowned. "You also testified that you gathered your own evidence before contacting law enforcement. Isn't that correct?" "I was the one who found out what really happened." The police followed up. "So you conducted your own investigation, outside the law." "I conducted it inside common sense." She sighed dramatically. "Miss Hale, is it possible your interpretation of the events was colored by personal resentment toward your sister?" I didn't blink. If resentment could create toxicology reports, maybe. But I'm good, not supernatural. The judge cut her off before she could respond. Move on, counselor. When I stepped down from the stand, Mom squeezed my hand. You did fine, she whispered. Rebecca testified the next day. She looked smaller up there, softer, like she'd rehearsed being fragile. Her lawyer fed her questions that made her sound remorseful but not guilty. I loved my mother, she said, voice shaking. I didn't want to hurt her. Curtis tricked me. I thought it was medicine. Curtis didn't look up from the defense table. He'd already served his purpose. When the prosecutor stood, the room quieted. Mrs. Scott, he said, if this was truly a misunderstanding, why did you research inheritance laws weeks before your mother's poisoning? Rebecca hesitated. I was just curious. He leaned in. And why did you send your husband a text that read, make sure it looks natural? No mistakes this time? Her lips parted, but nothing came out. The silence stretched until the judge finally said, answer the question, Mrs. Scott. Rebecca's shoulders slumped. I didn't mean for her to die, she whispered. That was it. The sound of her own confession, not enough to absolve her, but enough to end any illusion of innocence. When court adjourned for the day, Mom and I walked out through a side exit to avoid the reporters. She leaned on her cane, her breathing steady but shallow. It's strange, she said quietly. I always thought truth would feel lighter. It doesn't, I said. It just stops moving. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, Walker called. The jury deliberated less than 3 hours, he said. They found her guilty on all counts. I didn't speak for a moment. And the sentence? Life in prison. No parole. Mom was in the kitchen when I told her. She nodded once, her expression unreadable. Justice, she said softly. That's what they call it, right? It's the closest thing we get to it. She poured herself coffee, the steam rising between us. You think she ever thinks about what she did? Every day, if there's any conscience left in her. She took a sip, then looked at me. You don't sound convinced. And I've met people who've done worse, I said. Most of them sleep just fine. The following week, life tried to settle back into something normal. The cameras disappeared, the headlines faded, and the world moved on like it always does. But inside that house, time didn't move quite the same. Every room still carried the echo of something that used to be whole. Mom started walking outside again, slow, but steady, waving to the neighbors who pretended not to know every detail from the news. Sometimes she'd sit on the porch with her tea, silent for long stretches. I didn't interrupt. One evening, she asked, Do you ever miss her? I thought about it for a long time. No, I said finally. But I remember her. That's worse. She nodded like she understood. A week later, Walker called again. The civil case is settled. Curtis forfeited all his assets. The court ordered restitution to your mother. It's symbolic more than anything. Symbols work fine, I said. That night, I went to the porch. The air was still, heavy with Florida humidity. Across the yard, the neighbor's lights flickered on Dan, the man who'd stopped me at that door weeks ago. He waved. I nodded back. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if he hadn't spoken up that night. If I'd just opened the door, walked in, and found my mother already gone. But I didn't. And because of that, Rebecca was exactly where she belonged. Mom came out a few minutes later, wrapped in a shawl. It's over, she said quietly. Almost, I replied. But I'll take almost. We sat there without talking, watching the light fade, the crickets start up, and the world finally exhale. No one said justice served. No one toasted closure. But for the first time in a long while, the house didn't feel haunted. It just felt lived in again. The house was too quiet after the verdict. For weeks, silence was the only sound that made sense. Reporters stopped calling, the mail thinned out, and even the neighbors quit pretending they were just checking in. Gainesville moved on, but we didn't. Mom tried to go back to her routine gardening in the mornings, crossword puzzles at night, but every now and then, I'd catch her standing at the kitchen window, staring out at nothing, like she was listening for a ghost that wouldn't leave. Curtis was in a state prison outside Jacksonville, serving 15 years for accessory to attempted murder. Rebecca was in the Florida Women's Correctional Facility, 30 miles north, life sentence. No parole. Two people who used to argue about who'd pick up groceries now living behind separate gates. Walker said the system worked. Henderson said it was closure. Everyone had a word for it except Mom. She just called it done. But done doesn't mean healed. One morning, about a month after the sentencing, I drove her to Gainesville Regional to get her final checkup. The nurses treated her like a celebrity survivor. Smiles, sympathy, the usual soft tone they use for people who've been through hell. She handled it with her usual grace, but I could see the strain in her shoulders. On the way back, she turned to me. "You ever think about forgiveness?" I kept my eyes on the road. "Not really." "You should," she said softly. "It's easier than carrying anger forever." "Maybe," I said. "But forgiveness doesn't bring peace. It just lets the guilty sleep better." She didn't argue. She just looked out the window as the trees blurred by. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that word forgiveness. I'd spent my life analyzing motives, dismantling lies, predicting the next move. Forgiveness wasn't part of any playbook I'd ever learned. In my world, you neutralize threats. You don't forgive them. Around midnight, I found myself pulling up the Department of Corrections website. I don't even know why. Maybe I just wanted to see her name in writing. Rebecca Scott, inmate #428176. Seeing it like that, printed, logged, processed, didn't feel satisfying. It felt sterile. There was a small link, approved visitor application. I closed the tab. 2 days later, Marcus called. "You good?" he asked, like he already knew the answer. "Define good," I said. He laughed quietly. "Heard from Henderson. She said the state's closing all loose ends. Case file will be sealed next month." "Good. It belongs there." He hesitated before saying, "You ever gonna visit her?" "No." "Why not?" I thought about that for a moment. "Because seeing her doesn't change what she did. And I already know what she'll say." He was silent for a few seconds. "You know, some people go their whole lives without facing the truth. You faced it, and you won. Don't let it turn into another prison. Appreciate the therapy session," I said dryly. "Hey," he said, chuckling. "It's free." When I hung up, I realized he wasn't wrong. Winning didn't feel like winning. It felt like walking out of a burning house with everything intact except what mattered most. The following weekend, I took Mom to Street Augustine. She'd mentioned wanting to see the ocean again. We checked into a small bed and breakfast by the beach, white walls, wooden floors, the kind of place that smelled like salt and sunblock. On the second day, we sat on the porch watching waves break under a cloudy sky. She sipped her tea, quiet as always. Then she said, "You know what I miss? Boring days. Days when nothing happened." I smiled faintly. "You've earned some." She nodded. "So have you. You've been fighting too long." "I don't know how to stop." Then start by sitting still," she said. So I did. That night, she fell asleep early, and I walked down to the water alone. The tide was coming in, slow and deliberate, just like everything else that refuses to be rushed. I stood there until the hem of my jeans got wet, watching the horizon fade. It hit me then how small the world feels when the people you thought you knew turn into strangers. Family isn't just blood. It's history, shared spaces, unfinished arguments. Rebecca had burned all of that to the ground. Back in Tampa, the days started blending together. I went back to work remotely, helping the Army with intelligence reviews. Civilian life felt strange, quiet, clean, uneventful. The kind of peace that used to make me suspicious. Mom started smiling again, little by little. She baked, called old friends, even replanted her garden. Sometimes she'd joke, "Guess I'm harder to kill than I thought." I'd laugh, but every time she said it I remembered how close it wasn't a joke. One morning she handed me a sealed envelope. "This came from the prison," she said. "It's addressed to both of us." I stared at it. "Did you read it?" "No, you can." I opened it carefully. Rebecca's handwriting was neater this time, controlled. "Mom, Morgan, I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know I'm sorry. Not for being caught, for being the kind of person who could do this to you. I've had a lot of time to think, and the only thing worse than being in here is knowing I put myself here. I don't ask for contact. I just needed you to hear that I remember everything, and I wish I didn't. Rebecca." Mom read it twice, then folded it and handed it back to me. What do you think? I didn't answer right away. I think she finally told the truth. Mom nodded. That's something. I tucked the letter in a drawer and didn't touch it again. Weeks passed. The world kept spinning. Henderson retired from the force and sent Mom a card, no signature, just 2 words. Stay strong. Marcus moved on to another case in Texas. Walker closed the civil file and sent a final check from the settlement, which Mom donated to a veterans charity in Rebecca's name. I asked her why, and she said, because bitterness costs more than money. That was her version of peace. For me, it came slowly, quietly. I started running again in the mornings, the same route I used to take before deployment. The rhythm of my shoes on the pavement felt like something I could finally control. One morning, as the sun came up over the horizon, I stopped by a park bench overlooking the water. It was empty except for a single old man feeding birds. He looked up, nodded once, then went back to his bag of crumbs. It was ordinary, unremarkable, real. And for the first time since everything started, that felt like enough. When I got home, Mom was on the porch, sipping coffee, watching the street. She smiled when she saw me. You look lighter, she said. Maybe I finally am. She nodded, took a sip, and said, You know, revenge stories always end with someone broken. I'm glad ours didn't. Me too, I said, though I wouldn't call it revenge. What would you call it? Correction, I said. A painful, necessary correction. She smiled faintly. That sounds about right. The morning breeze lifted the edge of the newspaper on the table, flipping it open to a headline about someone else's tragedy, someone else's family. I reached over and folded it shut. For once, the past stayed quiet. The mornings felt cleaner now. The sun still hit the kitchen window at the same angle, lighting up the old tiles in the coffee pot, but somehow the light didn't look so heavy anymore. Maybe that's what happens after you've said everything that needed to be said. There's less weight in the air. Mom was at the table when I came down, reading the paper, glasses sliding halfway down her nose. They're saying there's another storm coming next week, she said, not looking up. Typical Florida. Guess we'll stock up on batteries again, I said, pouring coffee, just in case civilization collapses. She smiled without glancing away from the page. You always assume it will. No, I'm a realist. No, she said softly. You're a survivor. I didn't answer, but she was right. That's all survival ever is, being too stubborn to quit when you probably should. The day was ordinary, which was exactly what I wanted it to be. I ran errands, paid bills, got the oil changed. People at the store still recognize me sometimes from the trial coverage. They'd give me that look, part sympathy, part curiosity, but nobody said much anymore. I preferred it that way. When I got home, there was a letter in the mailbox. Not from prison this time, thankfully. It was from the Department of the Army. I opened it in the driveway, leaning against the hood of my car. It wasn't bad news, just paperwork. A formal offer to return to active duty in an advisory role, part-time. I read it twice, folded it back up, and stood there thinking. The Army had been my constant for 20 years. Discipline, structure, purpose, everything family life rarely is. But after Gainesville, I wasn't sure I had the stomach for more battles, foreign or domestic. Inside, Mom was washing dishes, humming softly. I set the letter on the counter. She didn't ask what it was. She just said, whatever you decide, make sure it's something that adds peace, not noise. I nodded. That's the plan. That night, the power flickered during a thunderstorm. I went around the house checking windows, like I always did, a habit I'd never shaken. Mom laughed from the living room. Still can't sit still, huh? Not when the world's shaking, I said. She shook her head, smiling. Some things don't need defending anymore, Morgan. Maybe she was right. Maybe not. The next morning, I visited the Veterans Center downtown, the one that handled counseling and reintegration programs. I'd volunteered there years ago, before everything happened. The director, an old Marine named Phillips, still ran the place. He looked up when I walked in. Well, if it isn't Captain Hale, he said, standing to shake my hand. Haven't seen you since before the storm hit your family. Trying to rebuild, I said simply. He nodded. You thinking of coming back to the fold? Not sure yet. Maybe as a consultant. I'm done taking orders, but I can still give a few. He laughed. That's the spirit. Then his face softened. How's your mother? Better, I said. She's tougher than she looks. She raised you, he said. Doesn't surprise me. Now. Before I left, he handed me a file volunteer outreach, mostly domestic abuse survivors and families of veterans who'd faced trauma. You'd be good at this, he said. You know what it's like to see the inside of something broken. Driving home, I thought about that. He was right. I'd spent years hunting truth in classified files and encrypted reports, but the most dangerous operations had always been personal. Maybe helping others find their way back could be my next mission. When I got home, Mom was on the porch reading a book. She looked up as I parked. You look like someone who made a decision, she said. I did. I'm not going back full time, but I'll work with the outreach program, help soldiers and families rebuild. That sounds like something real, she said. Something good. It's a start. She nodded, setting her book aside. Rebecca would have liked that once. I didn't flinch. Maybe. But liking good things doesn't mean you can do them. Hep. We sat in silence for a while. The cicadas buzzed, the air thick with that early evening humidity that sticks to your skin. Finally, Mom said, You ever wonder what makes someone cross that line? From pain to cruelty? All the time, I said. I've seen people do it in war, in families, in boardrooms. It's not always about greed. Sometimes it's about fear of losing control. She gave a small, sad smile. And you've always been afraid of losing control, haven't you? Yeah, I admitted. That's why I joined the army. It was the one place where control wasn't a sin. She reached out, touched my hand lightly. You don't need control to be strong. You just need to know when to stop fighting. I didn't have an answer. That night, after she went to bed, I poured myself a glass of whiskey and stepped out onto the porch. The crickets were deafening. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked twice, then went quiet. I looked up at the sky clear for once and wondered if Rebecca could see the same stars from where she was. She'd be 42 next spring. She'd probably spend it alone in a concrete cell, counting years instead of candles. And me, I'd spend it here, making sure Mom kept smiling, pretending that everything broken could stay mended. The funny thing about revenge is that people always imagine it ends with satisfaction, with a gun lowered, a confession made, justice delivered. But that's not what happens. It ends quietly, like this. With breathing, with survival, with mornings that start again. A week later, I went back to the outreach center. The first person I met was a young woman named Jamie, an Army medic recently discharged after her husband attacked her during a PTSD episode. She was polite, but guarded, eyes always scanning for exits. I recognized that look. I'd worn it myself for years. We talked for an hour about small things, deployment, routines, paperwork, but by the end she asked, How do you stop feeling like the world's still dangerous, even when it's over? I told her the truth. You don't. You just get better at living with the noise. When I got home that night, Mom was waiting on the porch again. How was it? Hard, I said. But right. She smiled. Good. Hard things usually are. I sat beside her, the boards creaking under our weight. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The air smelled like rain again. I glanced at her, at the quiet strength in her posture, and realized she was right. We hadn't lost everything. We'd just learned what was worth keeping. When the first drops started falling, she stood and went inside. I stayed, watching the storm roll over Gainesville, the sky flashing in slow, white bursts. Lightning used to make me think of battlefields. Now it just meant the sky was clearing itself out. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the rain hit my face. It was the closest thing to peace I'd felt in years. Not the kind of peace that erases pain, just the kind that makes it livable. And for once, that was enough.